This is The Beatwriter, the podcast with Marcos Grunfeld. Watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/The Beatwriter, or listen to us on Spotify or any podcast player from Google to Apple Podcasts.
The July 25th is the deadline that Major League Baseball set to the Major League Players Association to answer about the international draft. We are 2 months behind of that deadline, and we are inviting Mr. Ben Badler, a senior writer of Baseball America, to talk about the international draft. What is the international draft? What are the pros? What are the things against this system? And we are going to analyze everything about the international draft. For me, it's a pleasure to talk with Mr. Ben Badler, and thank you to Alfredo Villasmil to join me on this podcast in English too. Let's talk about the international draft. It's a good thing for baseball. It's a bad thing for the young players in Venezuela, Dominican Republic. How it will work for Major League Baseball, this system. Thank you again for joining me.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure for me. The original name of my podcast is Béisbol con Habichuelas, baseball with beans. So we have a lot of beans today, a lot of condiments.
Yeah.
And I put it baseball with beans because, baseball in the major is the academy, and here in the Caribbean, we put some season. So it's season, that's why baseball with beans. Ben, it's very important, that question, because I'm living in a country where baseball academies are a real business. And they made a lot of money, and sometimes, and I have came across with many of those kids, can you give me 25 pesos in order to go to my house to return home? And he's maybe 17, 18, 16. So what kind of good things do you see in the international draft?
Well, I think the main thing that would be beneficial both for players and teams if there were to have an international draft is that this entire signing process would slow down. The speed of the process right now, the pace of it it's just not good for anybody. It's not good for players. It's not good for teams. It's not good for the trainers and the agents who are responsible for developing and representing these players, because this started, I don't know, 8 years ago. I wrote a big story about how, all these teams were agreeing to, these commitments with players, a year before the players were eligible to sign on July 2nd. I think I even used Vladimir Guerrero Jr. As an example of, what, like a young amateur player in the story. And now he's, already one of the best players in the big leagues. That's how long ago it was. But now it's just gotten to the point where, players for, the upcoming January 15th signing class, the one after that, even 2 years after that, a lot of them already have commitments in place. And you go to showcases in, whether it's in the Dominican Republic or Venezuela, Colombia, all the showcases are for a lot of players who are 13, 14 years old. It's just it's not good for players to have to, be ready to showcase for teams at that age, and to have to make a decision on where they're going to play at that age. It's not good for the teams to try to be making decisions about what a player is going to potentially look like when he's in his early to mid 20s, when the player is still, 13, 14 years old. It's hard enough to do when they're 16 or 17. We miss all the time on college players, frankly, in the draft, who are 21 years old. So it would I think, benefit the players and the clubs to slow this whole process down. And then for the trainers and the agents too, like you said, it's a business for them, and it's not good for them to have to, go out and try to recruit players into their program at, such a young age, and then spend the time to develop them and get them ready to sign or ready to make a commitment by the time they're 13 or 14 years old. And then by the time, they're 16 or 17, if, maybe even younger than that, sometimes if they don't have something in place lined up with a team, all the teams are looking at, the younger players, and then, those players don't, the trainer sometimes will just have to release the players from their program when they're 16 or 17, and they might still have a future in baseball if we were able to slow this process down. So I think that would be one of the greatest benefits is a draft would bring, is just slow everything down.
Former Major League pitcher Eduardo Villasís is joining us.
What's up, guys? I'm sorry I'm joining late, but I'm just listening to all your great opinions about the draft, and I'll for sure have some couple of questions and just see where it's going to take baseball in Latin America.
Another question I've got here, because it's a very sensitive question, is about buscones and high-paid commissions they made by talking to family players, and maybe in the bonus they get about 50, 40%. What do you think that would be beneficial for the signer? That would be finished with high commissions. The instead of negotiating with the buscón or the family, the teams will do it direct with the parents. And the other question is, it will be only for 16-year-old or more 17, 18-year-old players could be also included into it?
You're asking in terms of both questions in the event that there is an international draft, you mean?
Yes.
So I think the way it would work is that there would be, MLB doesn't seem to be using this terminology, but what it is, it would be a hard slot for each player. So say the 10th overall pick in the draft has a slot value of $2 million, right? For example, in that case, let's say the Oakland A's have the 10th pick in the draft. The slot value there is $2 million. That means if they take that player, the player's bonus is going to be $2 million. So there's no negotiation back and forth in that instance. In the draft in the United States, it's different because every team has this larger overall bonus pool. So that pick that might be in the draft in the United States for $2 million, what teams will do is they'll take a player and they'll agree to sign him for, let's say, $1 million, and then they can use that extra $1 million, the difference between the pick value and what they actually paid that player, on another player later in the draft to try to, maneuver around their bonus pool money and sign maybe a greater quantity of players that way. But internationally, it would just be a hard slot. And, I think people look at it sometimes as, oh, well, they're taking away negotiating leverage from the player. But what it's actually doing, I think, is reinforce or giving more leverage to the players and away from the team. Because if the Oakland A's are probably a good example. If the A's were to take a player, again, let's say 10th overall, and the slot value is $2 million, the A's owner is going to say, why are we going to pay this guy $2 million? He can't negotiate with any other club. Right? We have his exclusive negotiating rights. He's not going to go to Vanderbilt or University of Miami, right? He doesn't have the leverage that a high school player in the United States has, where he could go to college or go to junior college and re-enter the draft the following year. The owner is going to say, let's pay him $1 million or maybe even less than that. So having the hard slot really gives the players, I think, more leverage to say, hey, if you take me here, you're required to sign me, and you can't, try to exert, negotiating leverage over me this way. And with regards to the first point about, the agents or the trainers, it's different. They provide a different service compared to agents in the United States, right? Like where they're taking, 3 to 5%, and they're for the most part offering contract negotiation, and then, they're advising them on other different things, and they might have, other endorsement deals for players as well, that they could take a commission off of too. But the trainers in Latin America really they are training these players. They have a program, and they're not just doing contract negotiation, which becomes less of a factor if there is this hard slot, but they are actually training and developing these kids for several years. They're feeding them. Oftentimes they're housing them. They're, providing them equipment, bats, balls, gloves, spikes, clothes. Kids are always growing a lot. Food, things to help out their family, travel for, showcases or tryouts, whether it's regionally in their own country or to other countries. A lot of Venezuelan players obviously going to Colombia or bigger showcases in the Dominican Republic or the United States. So what they should receive, I don't know the exact answer to that, but I think they do provide a different level of service for players compared to what a typical agency would for a say a high school player who's coming through the draft.
In March, an audio, a WhatsApp audio of David Ortiz went viral, and he said in that audio that the international draft will kill the baseball in Dominican Republic. Why the agents and trainers and players are so fear about this system? And it's accurate, that fear. Some players, some agents, some trainers compare this situation with what happened in Puerto Rico. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends who you talk to, because I think in the last round of the collective bargaining agreement negotiations, there was a lot more pushback from the Latin American players and agents and trainers who were against the draft, and now I certainly get the sense, and I would actually include international scouts in that group too, and now I get the sense that there's a lot more of a split camp on it, where a lot more of them are open to and are receptive to an international draft. I think, I mean, one of the concerns is, like you pointed out, when Puerto Rico went into the draft, it's certainly, I don't know if it was necessarily what caused a decline in players from Puerto Rico, but it at least correlated with a decline in baseball players coming out of Puerto Rico. But I think one of the major differences there is that Puerto Rico went from going in the international signing system to now those players are competing with everybody in the United States and Canada as well. So you're talking about high school players, college players. With the international draft, I think it would be a huge mistake to combine it all into one big worldwide draft, and now you have 16-year-old kids from Venezuela competing against college players who've been performing for 3 years in the SEC. There's a handful of players, your Wander Francos, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the truly elite players who I think would still fare pretty well in a system like that. But the reality is most of the players from the Dominican Republic or Venezuela, or if we were to talk about players from the United States too, who are 16 years old, they're just physically further behind. They're further behind in their skills. I think they would really get crushed in a system like that. So if there were to be one true global draft, I think that would be bad for international players. But if you just keep the international players in their own draft, I think that helps reduce, what would, potentially happen, what we saw happen with Puerto Rico. So I think there's some fear of that. And there's also, just when I talk to agents and trainers, they, one of their big concerns is we want to make sure that, enough of our players continue to get signed. We don't want to see the number of players go down. So, right now, I think we have about 1,000 plus international signings every year. So if that number were to go down a lot, I think it's a very valid concern. And it depends on how it just depends on how you structure the draft. I'm not saying that the solution is to have a lot of rounds. In fact, I think there's, good reasons why you would actually want to have a shorter international draft for that to happen. But a lot of it just depends on the details of how things are going to be structured and implemented, and some of the skepticism or fear of the draft too, I think, is also just based on MLB's history in Latin America, where people are rightly.
If it's within the international frame, for instance, Eduardo, when you were signed, you have to negotiate with an agent and everything. What do you think, from your point of view as a former player, with the new structure the international draft would have? Do you think it's you talking as a player from the player perspective and using your point of view as a former international drafted would be a good thing for the new generations?
Thank you for the question. When I signed, when I was a former player, there were not really probably one or two agents coming up when this started in Venezuela in 1998. So in my case, the scout had to negotiate directly with my family. So in that case, it was just right off the bat with the family. There was nothing else involved in that negotiation. So, I look at it this way, there's going to be a lot of cons in terms of what is going to be the playing age in those picks from the draft, from the draft, like you guys were saying, 16-year-old guys are going to play probably with 17, 18-year-old guys are going to be late development guys. It's going to kill the chance for a lot of players that did not have the chance to sign at 16 years old, that could have a chance before the draft, but now with the draft, they're going to be out of it, so they're not going to have a chance to sign as a free agent. In many cases, we've seen in organizations like the Astros, Garcia, he was a 21-year-old guy. He was bouncing around the system and he had a chance to sign. He was in the World Series. So we're probably not going to see guys like that anymore if the draft comes up. Also, we're going to be guys playing against academies in Latin America with guys that have 14, 13 against guys that have 17, 18 years old. And there are also going to be guys like, for example, agencies, small agencies of players that are going to have really good players, but the draft is probably going to give priority to the biggest academies in Venezuela. So, or in Dominica. So if I'm a famous, let's say, if I'm a really, really famous academy in Venezuela, but probably this one of the smallest academies in Venezuela have a really, really good talent, how is that player going to have the power to sign over the other academies that have been established, that have been investing a lot of money in players and have a really good system of signing players with the MLB? So how is that small academy going to have a chance to sign a guy on before the other big ones, you know, like the big fishes?
No, I think it's a very good argument that Eduardo is bringing up up to the table, because that's one of the things. What happens if the slots finishes and all those players remains unsigned? What is going to happen
for the players who don't get drafted?
Yeah.
So the way that it's set up right, or the way that MLB is talking about it with the 20 rounds draft, I think it sounds like after that you could still sign non-drafted free agents, but it would be for a capped bonus amount, say $20,000 or something like that. I actually see it. I mean, I see it right now. The way the current system is going, I think it actually hurts those older, or I put older in quotes because they're, 18, 19 years old. That's not really old, right?
Yeah.
Those players right now are just not getting looked at quite as much, because teams have already committed their bonus pools for the signing period. In some cases, their entire bonus pool, up to like a year or so before the signing period even starts. So they're trying to then compete with each other to sign, the top players for 2024, and then soon it's going to be 2025. So they're, the priority is not really to even look much at the, again, that quote unquote older, 19-year-old player. And what's the incentive for a trainer to even keep that player in his program right now if all he's going to get for him is a $10,000 bonus? Because $10,000 and under is what's exempt from the bonus pool. So the trainer or the agent with a program is saying, all right, I could keep training this guy for another year or 2 years and trying to get him signed, but most likely I'm just going to get him $10,000. Just financially, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to keep those players in their program. So those guys end up just getting cut from the program and not even getting an opportunity. Whereas if there is a draft, it slows everything down. So teams are not going out and scouting kids who are 13 and 14 years old anymore. Now they're looking at the players who are more 16 and 17, or if there is a player who's 18 or 19, especially once you get past top 10 rounds in the draft, and probably even before that, would you rather those guys, if you have an 18-year-old pitcher who's throwing 93, 94, who you see, I think teams would probably be more apt to go out and continue to scout those guys. Now I think you can make an argument that if you have a shorter draft and a larger cap on what you could sign an international free agent for,
in this
that would be
moment,
more.
in this moment, how many rounds we're going to have in the draft? How many players are going to be drafted in the blueprints that you have?
What MLB is talking about is 20 rounds. So that would be what, 600 players.
Yeah. And this is a good amount of players, or right now they are seeing more players in the actual system, in the current system.
So right now we're having, with international free agency the way it is, we're seeing about 1,000 or so players sign each year. But you can't just, part of it is you can't just look at the draft itself, because a lot of players will also sign as non-drafted free agents. So, the same way guys are signing now for, $10,000, you'll still have potentially, at least MLB's thinking, more players who will sign after the draft for that amount. I'm not totally convinced that will happen because of the way MLB has structured it and the way that MLB has cut down on a lot of minor league teams, because there's only so many roster spots to go around to put all these players, unless you want to be releasing a whole bunch of guys within a year or so after you sign them. But that's at least what MLB is trying to go for.
Ben, one of the things is how to catalog or to rank the number one player. It's going to be a fixed amount in the project. It's a fixed amount. So the number one is going to have 5 million. The number two is going to have 4.9 million. So that's going to be a fixed amount, or it can be more or less.
Yeah, that's going to be, like you said, it's a fixed amount, a hard slot value. So whatever, like you said, if the number one pick is $5 million, if you draft that player, you have to sign him and you have to pay him that amount.
And we have to compete. So we, as a Latin American, that's why I use the we pronounce. So we have to compete as well with, I don't know, players from Asia, Africa, if there are any, or Europe, if there are any. So
that will be my next question. And what will happen with Cuban players too?
So I haven't seen yet. I haven't seen MLB say yet exactly which countries will be involved in this. I presume that it would be whatever countries currently fall under the international signing system. So that would be, Dominican Republic, Venezuela are really the two big countries. But Cuba, obviously, only in the case where Cuban players leave the country to sign with a major league team. You couldn't draft a player who's still living in Cuba, but it would also, I think potentially would involve players from Korea, Japan, Taiwan. I think it would still be where, if you are think of Seiya Suzuki, who signed with the Cubs, where if you have enough years and enough seasons of professional experience, then you're exempt from those bonus pools and you can sign a major league contract. But the reality is, Major League Baseball teams don't really almost ever sign a Japanese amateur player. It's pretty rare for that to happen. And the number of amateur players signing from Korea and Taiwan, I think, is in the single digits each year. And you could probably count on one hand in a lot of years the number of players who are signing from those countries as amateur players. So it really would not have it would not affect too many of those players, other than probably it could have the impact of maybe even just reducing that number even further.
The most interesting case is the Cuban players, because some players from Cuba can sign a contract, like a major league player contract, like what happened a few years ago with Aroldis Chapman, with Johnny Cespedes, and that kind of players. That will hurt them. This draft hurt them.
Yes, and another thing is talking from Eduardo, because Eduardo knows very well the Latin American player situation. So how do you think, with this new perspective, Eduardo, the schools or the academies or even the players have to be prepared for that draft, because so Ben, if I'm not wrong, you talked before that there's not going to be more necessary to do showcases at 14 or 13 years old. So what do you think about it, Eduardo and Ben? So for this perspective, it's implemented. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what kind of league is gonna like players are gonna be chosen from. I believe Venezuelan and Latin American academies are gonna have to play each other. They're gonna have to create a league where the players are gonna be scouted. I know, there's a lot of like questions in the air because, like you guys said, European players, how are they going to sign? Are they going to enter in this draft? Are they going to be an European draft? Is it going to be a Latin American draft? But also with the Cuban guys with a like over age, with a different level. So all these, when you put it together, like it gets a little complicated. So I don't know how the system is going to work or how they're going to use like to really, really get players out of the draft. Of course, I believe through all academies are going to have a structure of playing like they have right now. But like I said, small academies are going to have to give players to the big academies. So they're going to have to be like a triangle negotiation in between 2 or 3 agents to get players in their system and then project them into the draft. So for me, wow, I see like a lot of complicated like topics for this international draft.
So I see it to answer both your questions. First, there's Alfredo. I think one of the adjustments to make is that since it is a hard slot value on each pick, and the incentive now is that the higher you go in the draft, the more money you make. So your incentive as an agent or a trainer is to get your player to go as high up in the draft as possible. So right now you might just have, you might take your player around to a whole bunch of or a handful of clubs and do private workouts at either that team's academy or having that team come to see your player at your field for a private workout. And then you might reach a big, agreement or some type of agreement with that club for your player. But now I think there's more, if there's an international draft, there'll be more of an emphasis on, getting everybody to see your player in public games rather than private workouts, because, you might have, certain teams that you're closer with, who you have good relationships with, and you can't just show your player to those.
So how we're going to implement that? Because here in Latin America right now, we have prospect showcases, the scouts come, the international developer sign the guy, and that's it. Now with this, we're going to need to create a league or something, because, okay, there's like 2,000 academies in Colombia, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, and Jamaica. I don't know where. Because in Mexico it's different, because in Mexico have to sign with the Mexican team and then they sell the contract to the majors. So the thing is, how it's going to be implemented? It's going to be, we need a league, we need something to do. So it's going to be with the academy, just to order the players. Where we're going to sign those players?
I think MLB is talking about having some type of a league or organizing games and showcases for everybody to come in and see, at least the players who.
So like a prospect league.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, they have this trainer partnership program, so I imagine they will use those programs to have them participate in this, like you said, prospect league or something like that. But I think the reality is that the landscape of how players are scouted in the Dominican Republic has changed pretty significantly over the 15 years that I've been doing this for, and really especially over the last 10 years and even 3-5 years, where a lot of these academies are saying, hey, I have a program, you have a program, let's play regular games against each other, and teams are going out and scouting players playing in games there. So I think I don't really think there's a problem, and I know some scouts with clubs who disagree with me as far as
But Eduardo says something very interesting. So probably you have an academy league or something like that. But for instance, Eduardo and I, we set up a small academy in Venezuela, and we have a diamond. So we can lose our profit because we have to give it up to a prestigious academy. So I think that is not fair. So, but if we have a league, and the league allows us to that small academy to enroll the player into that league, that would be different. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all in favor of having more games and more opportunities for for players to play in games and to be seen by scouts. I think in some ways the current system is maybe even more disadvantageous to players from smaller programs, because by the time you might a scout might go see a player in that smaller program, a lot of the budget for a team's international bonus pool might already be gone or be committed elsewhere. Whereas if you have a draft and everything is slowed down and you have more time to see not just the players from the bigger programs, but go out to some of these smaller programs and get eyes on those players, it might have more of an opportunity for some of those players who are not with the big name programs.
One of the things that is my main concern of the current system is that, at least in Venezuela, I don't know the exact number in Dominican Republic, but at least in Venezuela, the players that sign for 1 million or more money, only 2 players from Venezuela sign that kind of bonus and are an everyday player in Major League Baseball. Miguel Cabrera and Gleyber Torres, no one else. For example, what happened with Kevin Maitan, he doesn't seem to be on the way of to the big leagues. Right. That's the reality, and he received between Atlanta and the Angels almost $7 million. So, do you think that this system could help to those players to be able to have more chance to get to the big leagues, because they will be drafted at 16 years old, and they will not be committed to a bonus when they were 13 or 14 years old?
Yeah, I think like what you just said potentially could have an impact on the number of high bonus signings who end up getting to the big leagues, because like you said, you're no longer making those multi-million-dollar decisions on players when they're 13 and 14. The kids are still growing at that age, even at 16 and 17. Sometimes they're still growing, but at 16 or 17, you have so much more time to, they're at least they're older, they're more physically developed. They have greater skills at that point. It's still a long range projection, but there's less of a projection involved. And you also just have more time to build more history and see these players more and see them play in more games and to be able to make better decisions. So, we're starting to see more of these high dollar players come through, whether it's, I guess these are more Dominican players with, Wander Franco and Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Juan Soto. but I think if you are able to slow down the signing process where the decisions are being made when the players are 16 and 17 instead of 13 and 14, you should, at least in theory, see better results from that.
What do you think is the actual situation? Do you think it's probably we have international draft according to MLB rules, or what your sources have said to you? So as it is right now, good approach to the MLB proposal. What do you think about it?
As in, do I think that the draft is going to happen? Is that
Yes. If the international draft, according to the new MLB rules, is going to happen, or it's going to be like it is right now? What do you think about it?
I think most likely we will have an international draft. The reality is the two parties sitting at the negotiation table are the owners and the union, and the owners have really been pushing hard for an international draft, and the union represents the interests of players who are on 40-man rosters. So we see over and over in every negotiation, including this last one, that the union is willing to negotiate away the rights of players who are not in the union, whether that is amateur players in Latin America or in the United States, or minor league players who are not on a 40-man roster, who are making $8,000 a year in salary. The union does not really look out for those players' interests. So if not that I think a draft is necessarily against the best interests of players. It's obviously more open for debate, but I think the union, the owners are pushing hard for a draft, and I think the union will most likely, if they get enough in return for players who are on the 40-man rosters, they will give the owners the draft. The only question is whether they're they feel like they're getting enough in return right now, or if they might want to try to hold out to get more back from the owners for a draft in the CBA in the following CBA down the road.
Knowing the academy reality as you know them in both worlds, do you think about what Ben says about a league or something? Do you think it's viable to have a league for those guys who are going to be signed in July the 2nd? Do you think it's viable to set up like a sort of league or something like you say? Do you think it's probable and it's feasible and doable?
I think right now academies play against each other, as you can see it in their social medias and all this information out in the internet about academies in Venezuela. They play each other, but there's going to be a lack of players in certain academies because probably I have more players that are 12, 13, 14, and probably you have players that have more 15 and 16. So I'm probably not going to have a whole team to play with your team or against your team, like to provide, and it's going to have to be like a certain kind of, like it was a summer league before in Venezuela, like 3 organizations made one team to play against, like a summer league. So they're going to have to be some sort of a cooperative, so they can be a league. Because and here we go again, like if my player is better than yours, why I want your playing in my team? You know what I mean? So I'm probably going to have to project my player to number 1 pick in the draft. But if I get your player, he's probably going to be the number one pick. And besides that, I'm going to have to share with you a percentage of that signing bonus. So, I mean, it's a lot of involved with money. And I understand that that's beside of the draft. The draft is just going to have everybody aligned in the constitution of the draft. And besides that, it's going to be the players and the agents like negotiating themselves, like once they get into the draft. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna have an international draft. We're gonna have these major league rules. This is gonna be the bonus for first round, second, third, 10th, 20th. But that is gonna be the system. That's gonna be the constitution. But behind those doors, I'm gonna be the war of the money. Who gets more? Who gets less? You're gonna get into that 5% signing bonus, but after that, you're gonna have to give me 45. That's what I think is gonna be like behind doors. So basically, the draft is just gonna organize everybody. It's gonna organize players. They're gonna have a prize. Who are the participants, the players, but besides that, like Major League is not going to have, to arrange anything for anybody. You know what I mean? So
one of the concerns that I understand that Major League Baseball had or have is the corruption of the current system. Ben and Eduardo, do you think that the international draft could solve that?
As far as sorry, go ahead.
It's hard to say. Hopefully, yes. I don't know. Like, they're having some troubles. Like some people in the past have been caught, FBI involved, and cases as you guys know. And we never know who's gonna like be able to do anything like that. We have to look at it in the positive way. We have to look at it at hopefully everything works out for everybody. And but talking about corruption, I wouldn't say that because actually there have not been any cases of corruption that you can say this guy did this or did that. But that I think that's not the case of like us to be like talking about this draft. This draft is only, in my opinion, is going to organize Latin America. It's going to organize teams. It's going to organize players. And, it's going to get in a system where everybody's going to have to be like aligned with. So, like I said, after that, whatever people does, it's something that it's out of the what we really want to happen like for the draft. So draft, I think, is something that is gonna benefit a lot of people. A lot of people is gonna have to be out of the draft. I mean, it's gonna bring happiness and sadness for a lot of people. So we have to look at it the way that Major League is doing the best as possible to like make a lot of things work better.
Yeah, I think MLB wants to sell it as, we're going to clean up corruption. I think really what they want to do is slow down the number of signings because it makes for bad publicity for them when, the Baseball America is constantly writing how players have agreed to reached agreements with players when they're 14 and 13 years old, and other places are writing it too. And even MLB is putting it now out for the first time to say, oh yeah, actually this is happening. They're finally talking about it publicly because they actually are trying to put in an international draft. So I think they're talking about that corruption. Oh, we're gonna get rid of this, but I don't know that it's going to reduce any of that. It's maybe going to shift it around in some ways. What I hope happens is that there is some reduction in players using steroids I think everybody can agree. I would hope that that is a bad thing to, to have kids using steroids. So if you have one draft date, then, you can test players leading up to the draft. But I don't know. I don't know if that actually will reduce it. I certainly hope so, because it's a terrible thing. But I don't necessarily know that will have a reduction. But I suppose you could at least make the argument that if there's, one draft and one draft date, you can, drug test everybody, or at least a lot of the top players leading up to that draft date.
Ben, who would set up the choosing order? So, and what happened in that choosing order? For instance, the Baltimore Orioles or the Cincinnati Reds, the two worst. Well, right now it's the Boston Red Sox, the worst team in the American League. That's a pity, but well, that's the record right now. But for instance, the Cincinnati Reds, and that prospect didn't want to sign with the worst team in baseball. So what about the choosing order? What about if the prospect at 16 reject that bonus and he wants to get into the next round? Do you have something about it? Do you know something about it? What happened if?
So if the player doesn't want to sign, then the player can say, no, I don't want to sign. And then the player would go back into the draft for the following year. I think for players who are drafted in, the first round or the top rounds, I don't think you're going to see that happen too often. But I could certainly see scenarios where a player gets drafted in, say, the 8th round. The Yankees draft a player in the 8th round, and the bonus value for that pick is $120,000. And the agent for the player says, hey, only the Yankees and maybe a couple other teams saw this pitcher. But now that everybody knows he got drafted by the Yankees in the 8th round, if I put him in the draft next year, everybody is going to come back and see my player. So maybe I'm going to put him, maybe I'm not going to sign this year. I'm going to put him back in the draft next year and try to increase where he gets picked and thus sign for more money. So I could see that happening with some of the later round picks.
Because after all those rounds finish, are going to be able to sign. So if I don't get into the rounds, I can negotiate with whichever team I want, but with a small amount of money. So if I reject to sign with that team, I'm going to be able to do it freely with the other team.
If you get drafted by a team, I believe the way it will work is that you can only sign with that club, or you could choose to not sign and go into the draft for the following year. Whereas if you go undrafted, yeah, like you said, you could sign with any team, but the maximum amount you could sign for would be, say, $20,000. So it's not really an advantage to go undrafted, even though you could, in theory, negotiate with more teams.
Ben, because of the COVID pandemic, the 2020 players signed on 2021, the 2021 signed this year. What will happen with the 2022 players? They will sign on July 2nd. We are going back to the original system.
So for, like you said, the, what they still call like the 2022 players. So the players who normally, or going back to 2019, would sign on July 2nd. Those players are not going to be subject to a draft. Those players, the quote unquote 2022 players, are going to be able to sign January 15th, 2023. It's the players for the following year, the quote unquote 2023 players. Those players could be potentially the first ones to go into the international draft.
I think, Marcos, I think that Eduardo has came about with another subject, Ben, which is the structure after the draft. Because, okay, all the implementation and all the, the manufacturing of the draft and the ergonomy of the Major League Baseball is good. But what happened? The pre-draft, that league, how to show players, how to show them to the world. I think that Eduardo brings up a new subject for a new podcast, Eduardo, because it's true what you say. So it's the big fish are gonna eat the small fish, but if I am the small fish and I have the diamond, so what to do? So I think that I know that Major League Baseball is trying to put order into that melodic disorder we have in the Latin America. But I think it's very interesting what is going to happen with the pre-draft. I don't know what you all think about it.
I think that the most important thing in this draft is that players have the right age, have the right talent. The players have their drug test, have everything that MLB wants to make sure for this player to enter in the system. And that's the most important, and that's what they really care. So besides those facts, whatever can happen.
It's going to be a pretty good podcast, Ben.
Yeah.
So you are the first one in our English session.
Yeah.
So I have to get a new name for it. I don't know if baseball with beans sounds the same like baseball con habichuelas. I don't know if you know something about the Spanish, but so.
Tratando.
Let me tell you something. I know exactly how the dog barks here in my side, even Venezuela and even Dominican. And Ben, I agree with you. So we need some order for instance, for asteroids, for money, for legal documents, and that kind of thing. There have been, scandals over the years that you have reported as well. I think that's going to be a very good thing for baseball. Maybe it can damage a little bit some particular interest in money terms, but I think it's going to be very good for baseball.
I agree.
So what do you think, Ben?
I think it could be very good. I think it all depends on the details, right, of how Major League Baseball implements it. And I think one thing they have gotten better at is, man, I just remember in the last CBA negotiation, and they were talking about this international draft, and even before then, when they would just implement rules internationally, and they would just make these decisions from the office in New York. And I would be talking to, not just the agents and the trainers in Latin America, but just the scouts, the international scouts who are there every day on the ground and have been doing their job for 5, 10, 20, 30 plus years. And they weren't even being, consulted about rules changes and hey, if we're going to do an international draft, how can we best implement it? So MLB was making all of these decisions, and a lot of them were just like not very well thought out. And the more I just hope that, and I think they are doing it more now, that they just talk to and have more conversations with the people who are on the ground, who are living and breathing this day in and day out, who do this for a living because they have a program in Venezuela, or they have a program in the Dominican Republic, or they're a scout for, one of your own teams, Major League Baseball, who want what's best for, the players, who want what's best for the system if we are going to go to an international draft. So, they have had a lot more meetings on this with the trainers, with their own club personnel. So I think that is a good thing. And I hope that continues to be the case, because those are the people who can tell you the, potential unintended consequences of the decisions that you're thinking through. So I think the international draft certainly has some benefits, some drawbacks. I think on balance, if it's implemented well, there's a scenario where it could be an improvement for the players, for the trainers, and for the clubs as well. But again, it all just depends on the details of how MLB goes about implementing it.
I was reading some opinions of the persons involved in this industry of the July 2nd signings, and one of them are saying something that I don't know if it's something important for the players, but they say that the players right now in the current system have the chance to choose the team where they will play for the following 8, 9, 10 years of their life. But in the international draft, they will not have that chance, that opportunity to choose the team that they will spend a lot of time in their careers. Do you think that this is something important? Because in the MLB draft, it's the same way. The players can't
Right.
choose the team where they will play.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the real negatives, I would say, from the player's perspective is you don't have that opportunity to choose your team, to choose your employer. And I think that is important, especially for the Latin American players, because look, there's differences, like you said, in the draft for college players and high school players. You don't really have very little choice, at least for those players, as far as what teams are going to go to. And there is some difference among clubs and how they treat their minor league players. But I think especially for Latin American players, there's a pretty substantial difference between the Seattle Mariners or the Cleveland Guardians and those clubs' academies compared to the Washington Nationals or the Angels, which have more of a bare bones academy, and you're going to be living there and spending at least a couple of years potentially of your life there. So yeah, I mean that's one of the drawbacks and the negatives for a player. It's one of the the trade-offs is I mean you could have more control over choosing which team, although again a lot of the times it's the reality is.
Can you imagine, Ben? I've been training with the Yankees Academy with all my amenities. I'm a poor guy, but I have food, I have good. And suddenly, the Guardians signed me up when I was working with the Yankees Academy. And everything changes, even when they give me a good money, because the thing is the choosing line, who choose first and who chooses second and who chooses last in the round. So I agree with you from the perspective of the player is not going to be quite good.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, the reality is, what drives the decision for most players about what team they choose to sign which. I agree with you. So it's money, right? Like, so it's
money. That's a business.
So how much choice is it for the player right now? It's just they're choosing generally based on the team that's offering the most money. With the exception being sometimes a player does take less money for whatever reason to go to a certain club, or for the smaller $10,000 signing, maybe you have a few different offers to sign for $10,000, but that would still be the same for the non-drafted free agents looking at that kind of money.
Number one spot is going to be 5.2 million. So I have understood.
Probably something in that range. I mean, they haven't finalized the numbers yet because that's still subject to the negotiation. Yeah, I mean that's about what Jason Dominguez and Robert Puason signed for, but it's less than the number one overall pick in the draft in the United States gets too. So there is some imbalance there too.
Well, from my side, thank you very much for this. So the man in charge, the chairman of the board, is now taking the word.
Thank you, Mr. Badler, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts on the international draft. I hope that you enjoyed this time with Alfredo, Eduardo, and me.
Absolutely. This is a great conversation, guys. I love talking about this. So it's great to be able to have this this discussion with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Badler.
Bye-bye.
We appreciate it a lot.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much for your time, sir.